You know, sometimes the most interesting stories aren't about what people say, but about what they don't say, or what they try to keep hidden. And today, we've got a perfect example of that. We're going to dive into a CIA document that was drafted, stamped top secret, and then basically ordered to disappear for 8 whole years.
So here it is, the actual cover page. Take a look at the markings right at the top, top secret, and in red, non-disseminated report. This was information that somebody gathered but that almost no one was ever allowed to see. So that's the big question, right? What on earth was in this report that made it so sensitive it had to be buried?
Okay, to get what's going on here, we got to rewind the clock a bit, all the way back to December 2015. A very senior U.S. government official, the vice president at the time, made this big, high-profile visit to Kyiv, Ukraine. So the CIA did what it does. It gathered intel on how the whole thing went down with Ukrainian officials. And their reaction? Well, let's just say it was not what you'd expect.
I mean, the language here is pretty striking, isn't it? This isn't some watered-down summary. It's pulled right from the intelligence report. The Ukrainian officials weren't just kind of mad about it. They were straight up bewildered and disappointed. So the question is, why? What happened?
Well, it turns out they basically felt the whole trip was all style and no substance. The report says they believe the vice president showed up almost just to give a generic public speech. They were hoping for a real sit-down, to talk about actual substantive matters, but they felt like that just never happened. But, that disappointment was really just the tip of the iceberg. The real issue went a whole lot deeper.
Okay, let's get to the really juicy part of this report, the part that was probably explosive. The concerns from these Ukrainian officials went way beyond just feeling like they got a generic speech. They felt like they were seeing a massive double standard in action, especially on the topic of corruption. And here it is, this is the absolute core of the whole thing. According to the CIA's source, these Ukrainian officials were privately pointing to all the U.S. media coverage about the vice president's family and their alleged business connections in Ukraine. And for them, this was Exhibit A of a huge double standard coming from the U.S. government on corruption.
So what it really boils down to is this contrast you see here. On one side, you have the United States very publicly telling Ukraine, you guys have got to root out corruption. But then on the other side, from where these Ukrainian officials were sitting, it looked like the U.S. was just turning a blind eye to all the scrutiny around the vice president's own family's business in their country. That contradiction, that's what they were calling the double standard.
Which, of course, brings us to the central mystery of this whole thing. The CIA gathers this politically explosive information, an analyst writes it all up, so why did it just, poof, vanish into some digital drawer stamped non-disseminated? Why wasn't it passed around like these reports usually are?
Well, lucky for us, the declassified file gives us the answer, and it's in an internal email from February 10th, 2016, just a couple of months after the intel was gathered. This email? This is the smoking gun.
And boom, this is the exact moment the report gets put on the shelf. The email from a PDB briefer, and for those who don't know, that's the President's Daily Brief team, is super short and to the point. After talking to the Vice President's National Security Advisor, the direction was crystal clear. There was a strong preference for the report to not be disseminated. You gotta love that double not for emphasis, right? The message couldn't be clearer.
Okay, now this is a really, really important piece of context we need to cover. We need to understand what this document actually is and what it isn't. Right there on the cover page, it says Information Report, Not Finally Evaluated Intelligence. What that means in plain English is that this is raw intel. It's straight from a source. It hasn't been analyzed, it hasn't been verified or checked against other intel. Think of it like a snapshot of what one person or group was thinking. And that's absolutely crucial to remember here.
So the report gets buried in February 2016. Okay, now let's fast forward 8 years. How does a document that someone really wanted to keep under wraps finally come out into the open?
This timeline really lays out that 8-year gap perfectly. The visit happens in late 2015, the report gets written and then buried in early 2016, and then nothing. 8 years of silence. Until late 2024, when the document was just found. Yeah, it wasn't some dramatic leak. It was just unearthed during a totally routine review of intelligence databases. A standard bureaucratic process brought it to light.
So once they found it, the CIA obviously had to review it. And their assessment in 2024 was pretty clear. They said, yep, back in 2016, this totally would have met the standard to be shared. But they also added a few caveats. They noted the details were pretty sparse, and that it was all about the perspective of a previous Ukrainian government, not the current one.
So the final verdict was basically, hey, this is historically interesting for sure, but it doesn't really add anything to the intelligence picture we're looking at today in 2024.
So just to wrap it all up, let's look at the whole story in two images. On the one side, you have this top-secret report. It's raw intelligence, full of these Ukrainian officials' frustrations and their accusation of a double standard. And on the other side, the short, simple email that made sure it was buried, and that almost nobody in the entire U.S. government would ever get to read it.
And all of that leaves us with one last big question to think about. I mean, this is just one report, right? A single piece of raw intel that got held back. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does the story of this one single document tell us about those hidden pressures on intelligence? You know, that invisible line where gathering facts bumps up against political sensitivities. And maybe more importantly, what other stories just like this one might still be sitting in the archives, just waiting to be found?